There are many challenges you have to face in trying to prove the existence of God. The first of this is coming up with a definition of terms. What do you mean by God, and what do you mean by existence? The second challenge is accepting the rules of debate. For instance, you cannot apply circular logic like saying God exists because He said so in the Bible and the Bible says He exists. You end up having God writing Himself into existence and you ending up with no proving to do. With no proving done, you end up right where you started, wondering if God exists. If you are a scientist, and by that I mean a person who doesn't accept anything abstract,
there is not a single place where the fossils of one type of animal,
then you would probably say, to prove that anything exists, we just need to measure it in some way, to assign some quantity to its being. We can worry about its quality later on. The problem with this is, how do we measure infinity? Because you see, before we can prove that God exists, we must begin from the starting point that He doesn't exist. This means we have to admit first that we don't know what or who He is. And as a scientist, you'll have to admit that you don't know where He begins and where He ends. And you are looking for those 2 points so you can start your measuring. So it would seem that we cannot prove or disprove that God exists without first granting the notion of God, the idea that there is some entity out there that we are trying to discover. And we cannot measure ideas. We can only discover them if they're really out there. But first we have to settle the question, are we even here? You and I, do we even exist? René Descartes, in his book, struggled with this problem. It led him to lay down the ground rules in debating any subject, which is found in his book, Principles of Philosophy. Descartes argued that the first thing we need to agree on is that we exist ourselves. And then perhaps we can get ambitious and try to tackle the question, does God exist? The next thing he said we must agree on is that we're not sure of anything. In fact, the only thing we can be sure of is that we are in doubt. And this is a good thing because we cannot doubt that we exist while we doubt at the same time. René Descartes couldn't prove that God exists or doesn't right from the get-go because he must first convince himself that he exists. Because if he himself does not exist, then who is talking? Who is it exactly that is trying to prove the existence of God? At least Descartes was honest enough to know that he is not God. Then he observed that, well, he is doubting his own existence. If he is doubting something, anything, then he must be doing some form of thinking. And as long as he is thinking, then he must be acting in some capacity, the capacity of being a being. That's how he came up with the conclusive statement, I think, therefore I am. Of course, like everything else in philosophy, it sounds so much better and much more convincing in Latin. Cogito ergo sum. We can borrow some of that idea of René Descartes. I made this video and you are watching it. That requires thinking. Both of us must be thinking, and therefore both of us must exist. We're getting warm here. Since we both exist, then we have legal standing or capacity to go ahead and try to prove that God exists. Again, this is not about religion. We are not professing our belief in God or lack of it yet, precisely because we are not yet through with our little mental exercise of proving that He exists. If we decide to believe in Him after we have convinced ourselves that He is real, we can reserve that for later. For now, we are both going to act like unbelievers.
hello and welcome to Cogito!
As a matter of fact, if you have stayed and watched up to this point, you must be an unbeliever. But if I lost somebody a minute or so ago, then he must be a believer. And he made the right decision. He doesn't need to watch this at all. This is just for you and me. So then we can meet again in the next video. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe below. And I'll see you next time.